It was just a rainy Tuesday morning. Nothing special. Just another shift behind the counter, another round of empty plates and lukewarm tips. But when Rachel Myers saw the soaked, shivering man step into her cafe, head down, shoes squelching, dignity barely holding on, something in her paused. He wasn't asking for much. Just a place to stay dry. A quiet cup of coffee. But when the barista sneered, and the customers chuckled, Rachel felt a fire rise in her chest. So she paid for his coffee. $5. No big deal. Or so she thought. She didn't know the man she helped wasn't homeless. Or helpless. He was something else entirely. And what began as a small act of kindness would unravel into a journey she never saw coming, a journey that would test who she really was when no one was watching. Because sometimes, you think you're helping someone get through the rain. But the truth is, they might be the one who came to change your entire world. And what if, just what if, the person you almost ignored was the one quietly watching to see who you really are? This is that story. And it all began with a single cup of coffee. You wouldn't notice Rachel Myers at first glance. She blended in with the chipped counters, the smudged windows, the laminated menus that curled at the edges from too much steam. Just another waitress in a wrinkled apron and scuffed sneakers, moving from table to table like a ghost people barely remembered tipping. She didn't have the luxury of being tired, but the shadows under her eyes told on her anyway. 29 years old, but life had aged her in quiet ways, tightened the way she smiled, stiffened the way she walked, softened her voice until it sounded like she was always half apologizing for taking up space. Every morning at 5 o'clock, she was up. Not because she loved mornings, but because the world didn't slow down just because you were broke. She'd tiptoe around their tiny apartment so she wouldn't wake her sister Lily, whose cough had become a regular guest these days, dry, hacking, persistent. Rachel would leave a thermos of warm tea on the nightstand, a sticky note that read, "Back by 3. Love you." She worked the morning shift at Gino's Cafe, a downtown diner that smelled like burnt bacon and forgotten dreams. The kind of place where the regulars came more for routine than food. Truck drivers, nurses just off night shifts, old men with war stories no one asked to hear. And Rachel? She kept the coffee filled and the smiles soft, even when the tips barely covered her bus ride home. She didn't complain. Not out loud, anyway. Complaining felt indulgent when you were just trying to survive. At the end of her shift, she'd count out her tips, coins and crumpled singles, and walk to the corner pharmacy for Lily's cough meds. If she had enough left over, she might grab bananas. Or rice. Something filling. They didn't starve, not quite. But Rachel had mastered the art of just enough. Just enough food. Just enough rent. Just enough sleep to do it all again tomorrow. But here's the thing about Rachel, she wasn't bitter. Tired? Sure. Frustrated? Some days more than others. But she held on to something a lot of people had long given up, hope. Not the loud kind you post on Instagram. The quiet kind. The stubborn belief that decency still mattered. That doing right by others, even when no one's watching, still meant something. You wouldn't know it to look at her, but Rachel carried stories inside her. Like the time she was 10 and her mom collapsed at a bus stop and nobody helped, except for one old woman who sat with them for an hour in the cold. She never forgot that woman. She didn't even know her name. But that stranger had changed something in her. Had planted a seed. So Rachel had made a promise to herself, whispered late at night when Lily was asleep and the weight of the day made her eyes sting. When the moment comes, I'll show up. I won't look away. She didn't know how. Or when. But she was ready. That's why she noticed the man. The one who came in from the rain. That morning, everything had been normal. The coffee machines hissed. The radio played something from the 90s that no one paid attention to. Customers stared at phones or newspapers, waiting for pancakes that always took a little too long. And then the bell above the door jingled. He walked in slowly, like he wasn't sure if he belonged. His coat was soaked through. His shoes left ghostly wet prints on the tile. His hair was matted, gray at the temples, and he looked tired. Not just from the rain, but from life. Rachel noticed all of it. Because Rachel always noticed people who seemed a little out of place. He stood by the counter, squinting at the menu. Then reached into his pockets. Once. Twice. Frantically now. No wallet. He didn't beg. Didn't cause a scene. Just whispered, barely audible over the clink of silverware, "I'm sorry. I must have left it at home. If it's all right, I'll just wait here until the rain stops." The barista, a guy named Jeremy, all tattoos and sarcasm, laughed. Loud enough for everyone to hear. "This isn't a shelter, man. No money, no coffee. No loitering." The diner fell quiet. You could feel the judgment dripping from every booth. The man's face turned red. He nodded, shame tightening every muscle in his back, and he turned toward the door. But he didn't get far. Rachel stepped in. Not because it was heroic. Not because it was smart. But because it was her moment. She pulled a 5 from her apron, one she'd been planning to use for cough syrup later, and laid it on the counter. "He'll have a coffee," she said calmly. "And a seat." Jeremy rolled his eyes. Someone in the back muttered something about playing Mother Teresa. Rachel didn't care. She looked that man in the eye and smiled. "A real one. I'll bring it to your table." "By the window?" He nodded, quietly stunned. She walked away without waiting for thanks. Because Rachel Myers had learned that kindness doesn't need an audience. It just needs courage. And that day, on a rainy Tuesday in a forgotten diner, Rachel didn't know she was being watched. Not just by the man she helped, but by a moment that would change her life forever. It should have been just another forgettable moment. Just another customer, just another rainy day. But it wasn't. Because the way the man stood there, shivering, small, quietly humiliated, it struck Rachel like a memory she didn't expect to resurface. He didn't look homeless. He didn't smell like the street or carry the wild-eyed desperation that made people uneasy. He just looked forgotten. Like life had been folding him up, one edge at a time, until he barely took up space. And Jeremy, young, smug, and always loud enough to be overheard, folded his arms and made a show of it. "Look, man," he said, leaning over the counter like a gatekeeper at the edge of decency, "this ain't a bus stop. You got no money, you got no seat. That's how it works." The old man tried to explain, his voice barely above a whisper. I thought maybe, just until the rain." "Nope," Jeremy cut in, sharp and cold. "You want shelter, try the Mission 2 blocks down. We serve paying customers here." Someone laughed. A dry, cruel chuckle from the back booth. Rachel didn't even have to look to know who it was, 2 suited regulars who treated brunch like a stage and the staff like props. "Can you believe this guy?" one of them sneered. "Walks into a café like it's a free buffet. Entitlement is getting out of hand." The other chimed in, "Maybe he thinks he'll charm his way to a cinnamon roll." More laughter. Rachel froze. Not because she didn't know what to do, but because she knew exactly what would happen if she did it. She'd been warned before, don't get involved, don't play savior. Gino's was a business, not a charity. Her job was to serve food, not morality. But Rachel never forgot faces like that man's. She never forgot the look of someone trying to stay small enough not to get kicked out, yet desperate enough to ask anyway. She saw herself. She saw her mother. She saw the old woman who once stayed on a cold sidewalk, offering nothing but presents. And something in her snapped. She walked to the counter, slowly, like the entire room had turned to glass and she didn't want to break it. Her tray clattered slightly as she set it down beside Jeremy. He barely glanced at her. "Don't get involved," he muttered under his breath. Too late. Rachel reached into her apron, fingers brushing past loose change and folded grocery lists. She pulled out a crisp $5 bill, the one she'd been saving for cough syrup. She slapped it onto the counter, not hard, but with enough weight to make Jeremy look up. "I'm paying for his coffee," she said, her voice low but unwavering. Jeremy scoffed. "You serious?" "Dead serious." "Rachel, he can't just." "He's not just anything," she cut in. "He's cold. He's tired. And right now, he's standing in a room full of people who think they're better than him because their wallets are full and their shoes are dry." She turned slightly, her voice louder now, not yelling, but sharp enough to pierce through clinking plates and awkward silence. "Kindness isn't a luxury," she said. "It's not a transaction. It's not a game we play when we feel generous." The laughter stopped. Even the regulars at the back went quiet. Jeremy looked like he wanted to say something smug. But he didn't. He just stepped back and rang up the coffee like it was radioactive. Rachel turned to the old man. His eyes were wet, not from the rain, not entirely, and he looked at her like he didn't know whether to sit down or disappear. "Please," she said gently. "Have a seat. I'll bring it over." He nodded, barely, and shuffled to a booth by the window. He sat slowly, hands trembling, coat dripping onto the floor. But for the first time since he walked in, he looked like he belonged. Rachel poured the coffee herself. She didn't wait for Jeremy. She didn't ask permission. She poured it black, just like he'd asked for, added 2 sugars because she had a hunch, and placed the cup gently in front of him. "No rush," she said, her voice soft now. "Stay as long as you need." He looked up, trying to speak. But she shook her head. "No thanks needed." And then she turned and walked away. But inside, her heart was pounding. Because she knew what she'd just done. She hadn't just paid for coffee. She'd made a statement. To Jeremy. To the suits. To the silence that too often rewarded cruelty and punished compassion. And she knew what came next. Repercussions. Whispers. Maybe even a warning from the manager. But Rachel had never been one to regret doing the right thing. Even when it cost her. As she returned to clearing tables, a new hush fell over the café. Eyes followed her. Some full of quiet admiration. Others, judgment. But none dared speak. Not yet. Because in that moment, the power had shifted. And what no one knew, what not even Rachel knew, was that this quiet rebellion, this $5 act of kindness, it was being watched. Not just by the man she helped, but by someone who had come in not to be served, but to find out who still remembered how to serve others. And that, as it turned out, was the beginning of everything. Rachel barely had time to wipe down the next table before her name was called over the intercom. "Rachel, office." Now. The voice belonged to Brian, the manager with the permanently furrowed brow and the customer service smile that never quite reached his eyes. She knew this was coming. Every step toward the back office felt heavier than the last. The swing door creaked behind her as she stepped into the cramped room that always smelled like burnt coffee and bleach. A single bulb buzzed above. The kind of place built for reprimands, not conversations. Brian didn't even look up. "Close the door." She did. He leaned against the desk, arms crossed like a disappointed father. "Wanna tell me what that was?" Rachel didn't blink. "I paid for his coffee. Out of my tips." "That's not the issue," he snapped. "You made a scene. You embarrassed a coworker in front of customers." Rachel tilted her head. Jeremy embarrassed himself. Brian's eyes narrowed. You don't get to decide who gets served here. That's not your job. She met his gaze evenly. I didn't think kindness needed corporate approval. His jaw clenched. You're here to work. Not to preach. A long pause stretched between them, tight and electric. Finally, she asked, "Can I go back now?" He didn't answer right away. Just waved her off with a tight flick of his hand. She walked out, not triumphant, but unbroken. Until she stepped back into the kitchen. Marcy and Josh stood by the sink. They went quiet the moment she appeared. But not quiet enough. Must be nice, Marcy muttered just loud enough for Rachel to hear. Acting like Mother Teresa when you still split rent with your sick sister. Josh chuckled. Bet she thought that guy was secretly rich. Waiting for a golden tip or some viral TikTok moment. Rachel said nothing. Not because she had no words, but because their words didn't deserve hers. She clocked out without another glance. Grabbed her coat. The drizzle outside had turned into a stubborn rain. She didn't run. Didn't try to avoid the wet. She walked slowly, head up, shoulders back, even as water slid down her collar and soaked her shoes. The bus was late, as always. She stood alone at the stop, arms crossed, watching the city blur behind a veil of rain. Her reflection ghosted in the bus shelter glass, tired, pale, hair frizzing from the humidity. But in her eyes? Still something steady. Something no one in that cafe could touch. When she finally made it home, a cramped second-floor apartment with peeling wallpaper and a window that never quite shut, Lily was curled up on the couch beneath 2 blankets, her breath wheezy but even. "Hey," Rachel whispered, brushing damp hair from her sister's forehead. Lily stirred. "You're late." Got caught in the rain, Rachel smiled faintly. She reheated yesterday's oatmeal, added a pinch of salt, and sat next to her sister while she ate. Later, when Lily had fallen back asleep, Rachel opened her wallet. $3. 1 subway token. And an old, creased photo of their mother, smiling beneath a paper umbrella at a street fair from years ago. She stared at the photo for a long moment. Then slowly folded it back and tucked it inside. No regret. Not for the coffee. Not for the confrontation. Not even for the humiliation. Some things were worth more than peace and comfort. Some things you did not because they changed your life, but because they said who you were. That night, she sat by the apartment window, her knees drawn to her chest, watching headlights streak past in the wet. And her mind drifted. To the old man. To his silence. To the way he looked at her like she hadn't just bought him coffee, but had somehow given him something far deeper, dignity. She wondered where he went after. If he made it home. If he had a home. She didn't expect to see him again. That wasn't the point. She hadn't done it for what came next. She'd done it because once, when she was just a girl and her mother collapsed in a crowded market, no one had stopped to help. Except one woman. Old. Wrinkled. Worn shoes and a patched skirt. She gave them water. Wrapped a shawl around Rachel's shoulders. Stayed until the ambulance came. Rachel never learned her name. But she never forgot her presence. That moment had carved itself into her bones, stitched itself into her story like a quiet promise whispered to the universe. When it's my turn, I will not look away. And today had been her turn. Maybe it cost her her standing at work. Maybe Jeremy would make sure she got fewer shifts. Maybe people would keep whispering. But she didn't care. Because that small, defiant act, that cup of coffee, was hers. It had made her visible. Not in a flashy, viral way. But in a real way. And in a world where it was so easy to be invisible, that meant everything. Outside, the rain kept falling. But inside? Rachel Myers, waitress, caregiver, invisible girl with $3 to her name, felt something rare begin to rise inside her. Peace. The kind that doesn't come from applause. The kind that grows when you know, deep down, you did what was right. Even if no one clapped. Even if it cost you something. Because sometimes, the most valuable thing you can own is knowing you stood up when it mattered most. 3 days passed. 3 shifts. 3 bus rides. 3 long walks home in shoes that still hadn't fully dried. The whispers at the cafe had settled into a dull background hum. The regulars mostly avoided Rachel's eyes now, not out of anger, but something more awkward. Guilt, maybe. Or shame for not having spoken up when it mattered. Jeremy barely spoke to her. Marcy offered clipped greetings. Brian kept his distance, his mouth tight with unspoken irritation. But Rachel kept moving. Kept pouring coffee. Kept clearing tables. What else could she do? By the 4th morning, it felt like the world had resumed its usual rhythm. Quiet resignation. The smell of burnt toast. Another cloudy Portland sky. Until the doorbell chimed. She didn't look up at first. She was wiping down a table, her focus on a syrup stain that refused to budge. But then, something shifted. The air changed. It was subtle. Like someone had opened a window no one could see. She glanced toward the entrance. And froze. He was back. But not the same man who had stood in shame at the counter, soaked and shaking. This man was composed. Poised. Crisp charcoal gray suit. Cashmere scarf tucked neatly at the collar. His shoes polished, his salt and pepper hair slicked back like it belonged in a Wall Street boardroom. Rachel's heart skipped. He didn't go to the counter. He didn't speak to anyone. He walked straight to the booth by the window, the same one where he had once sat dripping, humiliated, invisible, and took a seat. The diner seemed to hold its breath. Rachel hesitated, dish rag still in hand. Should she ignore him? Pretend not to notice? But something in her said, no. So she set down the rag, picked up a menu, and approached. As she reached the table, he looked up. And for a moment, it was just the two of them again. Not Waitress and Billionaire. Not Charity and Mystery. Just 2 people, seeing each other fully for the first time. I'm not here to order, he said quietly. Rachel blinked. I only have one question, he continued. Why did you help me? She opened her mouth, closed it again. The question was simple. But the answer wasn't. I don't know, she said, her voice quieter than she expected. You didn't know who I was. You had nothing to gain. She glanced at the counter. Jeremy was pretending not to watch, but he was definitely listening. So was half the cafe. I didn't think about that, she said. You didn't look like someone asking for a handout. You looked like someone being made to feel small. And I know that feeling. He nodded, almost imperceptibly. Rachel sat down across from him, uninvited but not unwelcome. She didn't notice the stares anymore. When I was 17, she said softly, my mom collapsed in a crowded street market. And nobody stopped. They just stepped over her. Kept going like she was trash. His eyes didn't leave hers. One woman, just one, stayed with us. She had nothing. Wore clothes older than I was. But she sat on that cold sidewalk until the ambulance came. Wrapped me in a shawl and gave me water from a grocery bag. Rachel swallowed. I never knew her name. But I never forgot what it felt like to be seen. And I told myself, if I ever got the chance, I'd be her. The man leaned back slowly. A breath escaped him, something deep, almost tired, but not in a defeated way. More like the release of a truth he'd been carrying for too long. I used to read stories like that, he said. About ordinary people doing brave things. Why'd you stop? She asked. He gave a small smile. Because I stopped believing they were real. Another beat of silence. The kind that didn't feel empty, but full of everything unspoken. My name, he said at last, is Graham Whitmore. Rachel blinked. She knew that name. Everyone in Portland did. The founder of Whitmore Group. Real estate. Infrastructure. Non-profits. Rumored to be worth billions. Her heart thudded. Why were you dressed like that? That day? I've done it for years, he said. Travel alone. Dress down. Leave the wallet at home. Not to deceive. To observe. I wanted to see what people saw when I had nothing to offer them. Rachel shook her head slowly. So it was a test? No, he said gently. It was a search. For what? For someone who hadn't forgotten how to be decent. He looked down. Then back at her. That day, I found her. Rachel's throat tightened. Her hands curled slightly in her lap. And now? She asked. What are you here for? He studied her, as if deciding how honest to be. I don't know, he admitted. But I know I didn't want to leave things unfinished. Rachel nodded. She understood that. Deeply. They didn't talk long. Just a few more minutes. About books. Music. How kindness was louder when it didn't announce itself. She didn't pretend to know the authors he mentioned. And he didn't pretend to be anyone other than the man who had once been soaked and shaking in that booth. When he stood, so did she. I won't ask anything of you, he said. But I'd like to offer something. No expectations. Rachel didn't answer right away. Then, quietly, she said, sometimes the smallest things echo the longest. Graham nodded once, then turned toward the door. He paused just before stepping into the rain. I hope this isn't the last time we talk, he said without turning around. And then he was gone. Leaving Rachel standing by the window, the smell of coffee in the air, her world somehow split open and stitched back together all at once. She didn't know what was coming next. But for the first time in a long time, she was ready to find out. 3 days later, the envelope came. It wasn't flashy. No gold trim, no embossed crest, no expensive perfume clinging to its edges. Just a simple white envelope slipped under her apartment door, her name written in neat, almost old-fashioned handwriting, Rachel Myers. Inside, a note. Rachel. I visit Montreal every year. It's quieter there, cleaner air, slower clocks. This time, I was hoping for company. Not formality. Not business. Just a conversation. A walk. A window seat on a train. No expectations. Just an honest invitation. Graham. Tucked beneath the letter was a round-trip train ticket. First class. Rachel stared at it like it might vanish if she blinked. Her stomach flipped, her breath caught, and for the first time in a long time, she felt afraid. Not of him, but of what saying yes might awaken inside her. At dinner, she laid the note on the table. Lily sat across from her, legs curled beneath her, coughing softly between spoonfuls of rice. You thinking about going? Lily asked, her voice raspy but knowing. Rachel hesitated. I don't belong in that world. Lily didn't flinch. Maybe he's inviting you into his because he sees something the rest of them missed. Rachel didn't sleep much that night. Her mind raced with old doubts, rusty fears. But just before dawn, as the sky began to gray and the sound of rain softened on the windowpane, she made her decision. She packed light, a worn leather journal, 2 sweaters, a pair of borrowed flats, and the book she'd been too tired to finish. She left a sticky note on the fridge. Groceries in the envelope. Tea in the pantry. Love you more than pancakes. And with that, she boarded the train. Graham was already seated when she stepped into the cabin. No entourage. No press. Just him, leaning back in a wool coat, a book in one hand, 2 steaming coffees on the table between them. He looked up and smiled, not the polite smile of a powerful man used to getting his way, but a gentle one. Quiet. Real. I wasn't sure you'd come, he said. Neither was I, she replied, setting her bag down and easing into the seat across from him. Outside, the city slipped past the window, buildings dissolving into trees, noise into silence. They didn't talk much at first. And that was okay. The rhythm of the train filled the gaps. The occasional whistle. The soft hum of movement. Rachel sipped her coffee and watched the world change. It wasn't a luxury trip. No champagne. No caviar. Instead, it was real. Over the next week, they traveled. Not to 5-star resorts or VIP lounges, but to community gardens where volunteers planted herbs beside broken fences. To homeless shelters, where Graham spoke little but listened deeply. To youth centers, where teenagers danced and debated under leaky ceilings and chipped paint. Rachel saw him there, not the billionaire, but the man. The one who knelt down to tie a boy's shoe before he tripped. The one who remembered names. Who hugged like he meant it. Who stayed long after the cameras had left. She watched him unload crates of canned food without a single complaint. Watched him ask for extra chairs so no one had to stand during lunch. And slowly, she began to understand. Graham didn't live like a rich man escaping his guilt. He lived like a man trying to rediscover something he'd lost a long time ago. And in every place they visited, Rachel wasn't introduced as his guest or his companion. She was just Rachel. And that was more than enough. In the evenings, they sat on porches of houses halfway rebuilt by volunteers. Sipped chamomile tea brewed from dented tins. Watched the sky turn from gold to blue to black. One night, in a cabin nestled by a pine forest just outside Quebec, they sat in silence on a creaky wooden deck. A single lantern glowed between them. Crickets sang. The air smelled of pine needles and something ancient, maybe grief, maybe peace. Rachel curled into a wool blanket, her hair tucked behind her ears. Graham leaned back, eyes closed. You know, he said, I've had people offer me everything, comfort, attention, even love. But I'm not looking for someone to adore me. He opened his eyes and turned toward her. I just want someone who understands why I care about the things I do. Who doesn't need to be dazzled, just present. Rachel didn't answer right away. Then, slowly, she said, I don't know if I'm that person. I don't know if I understand all the reasons why you are who you are. She paused. But I know this, I've never felt more like myself than I do when I'm around you. Graham didn't respond with words. He just looked at her with something she hadn't seen in anyone's eyes in a long, long time. Recognition. Not of status. Not of potential. But of soul. They didn't touch hands. They didn't promise forever. Because this wasn't a love story, not the kind that ends with fireworks and first kisses. This was something quieter. More enduring. 2 people. 2 paths. Meeting not to rescue or possess, but to witness. And in witnessing one another, something began to heal. They were back in the city. The sky had turned from soft gray to the deep amber of a fall afternoon, and Rachel found herself standing in front of a place she never imagined entering, a rooftop terrace atop a restored church, now transformed into a community hub. Below them, the city moved like it always had, fast, distracted, full of people with places to be. Up here, it was still. Graham stood beside her, holding 2 mugs of tea. No assistants, no briefcase, no curated presentation. Just him, slightly winded from the stairs, but smiling. I wanted to show you this place, he said, handing her a cup. It's one of my favorites. No press. No headlines. Just work that matters. Rachel took a sip. The tea was strong, earthy. Real. They sat at a small wooden table near the ledge. The wind tugged at her scarf. Graham took out a simple folder from beneath his coat and placed it on the table without a word. Rachel glanced at it. No name, no logo. Just a plain manila folder, a small paperclip holding it shut. What is it? She asked. A beginning, he replied. She opened it slowly. Inside, legal papers. Drafts. Incorporation documents. Charitable licenses. At the top, typed in soft gray ink, the Rachel Myers Foundation. She blinked. This is, she began. A real thing, he said. Fully funded. Staffed. Ready to launch. She swallowed. Why? Graham looked at her. Because your name should be attached to something bigger than a tip jar, he said. Because you've shown more courage, more integrity, and more clarity of heart than most people I've ever met. Rachel shook her head slightly, overwhelmed. I don't want to buy your gratitude, he added. I'm not offering this to impress you. I'm offering it because the world needs more places like the one you carry in your head. And I can help make it real. She stared at the documents. The numbers. The resources. The ease of it. It was everything she'd never even dared to dream of. And it terrified her. Graham leaned forward, his voice softer now. You wouldn't have to run it. You don't even have to be involved if you don't want. But it will exist. Because you do. Because someone like you chose to see a man the world had dismissed. Rachel closed the folder gently and sat back, her fingers trembling slightly around the tea mug. Silence stretched between them, uncomfortable, but honest. Finally, she spoke. I'm honored, she said. Really, I am. But I don't want to start with a parachute. Graham's brows furrowed. A parachute? She looked him in the eyes. I want to build something the slow way. The hard way. I want to meet every volunteer. Scrub the walls. Paint the windows. I want to know the names of the people who come through the door because I welcome them, not because they saw my name on a letterhead. Her voice didn't shake. I don't want to inherit a future, Graham. I want to earn one. Graham didn't argue. He didn't try to convince her. He just watched her with something rare, respect without possession. After a moment, he smiled. Not a disappointed smile. A proud one. That's what makes you different, he said. Rachel exhaled. You could have taken the easy road, he continued. People would have understood. They would have praised you. Called you smart. I don't need praise, she said. I just want to build something that matters, even if no one claps. He nodded, eyes glinting in the afternoon light. Then you're already ahead of most people I've met. There was no ceremony. No ribbon cutting. No flash photography. Just 2 people on a rooftop, drinking tea, deciding, each in their own way, to choose meaning over comfort. And as the wind whispered around them, something passed between them. Not a transaction. Not a romance. But a quiet understanding. She hadn't rejected him. She'd revealed herself. And he had listened. Not as a man used to being obeyed. But as a man finally learning to let go of control. He reached across the table, gently covering her hand with his own. No matter what you choose to build, he said softly, just know, I'll be in your corner. Rachel's eyes glistened, but she didn't cry. Instead, she nodded once, strong, certain. And in that moment, they both understood. This wasn't the end of something. It was the beginning. Not just of a project, but of a life lived on their own terms. Built not from wealth, but from presence, conviction, and the courage to say no, even when yes would have been easier. The sign above the window read, "The first cup." No tagline. No bold promises. Just 3 words in hand-painted letters, brushed in warm amber paint that caught the morning light like a quiet invitation. Beneath it, etched into the glass in soft cursive, no one should have to earn kindness. It had taken nearly a year of late-night planning, burnt fingers from DIY renovations, countless grant applications, and whispered prayers into cold pillows. Rachel had scraped it together brick by brick, donation by donation. The space wasn't flashy. No marble countertops or fancy espresso machines. But it breathed. Exposed brick. Wooden tables mismatched by design. A community board pinned with handwritten notes. And on the far wall, a piano, silent for now, waiting to be played. The smell of cinnamon and fresh coffee filled the air, mingled with hope. She opened the doors at 7 a.m. on a rainy Tuesday. Full circle. Just like before. A small chalkboard near the counter greeted each customer with an unusual message. Your first cup is on us. Your second? On someone else. Rachel stood behind the counter in an apron stitched with threadbare stars. No staff yet. Just volunteers. Friends. Neighbors. A high school teacher who wanted to give back. A retired bus driver who now wiped tables with surprising tenderness. And then the door opened. He was older. Thin. Soaked to the bone. His hands trembled slightly as he held the door open. His coat hung off his shoulders like it had once belonged to someone else. His eyes scanned the cafe, not with entitlement, but with caution. Rachel saw the barista step forward, new, young, unsure. Sir, he began hesitantly, we serve paying customers first. If you don't have. But Rachel was already moving. She touched the barista's shoulder gently, offering him a quiet nod. Then she turned to the man. Would you like a seat by the window? She asked. The man blinked, unsure. Just something warm, he murmured. To sit for a bit. It's been a long morning. Rachel smiled. Then let's make it longer, with a little peace. She led him to a table, brought him coffee, black, with 2 sugars, and said nothing more. No spotlight. No lecture. Just presence. The man sighed as he sipped. Eyes closing for a moment. The warmth settling into his bones like something sacred. And across the street, under a large black umbrella, a man watched quietly. Graham. He didn't wave. Didn't approach. Just stood there, coat collar up, face calm, as if he'd come not to visit, but to witness. Rachel glanced toward the window. Their eyes met. And in that brief, silent exchange, so much passed. Gratitude. Farewell. And something else. A promise kept. He nodded once. Then turned. And disappeared into the rain. Rachel stood there for a while. Not crying. Just breathing. Then she returned to the counter. The day went on, soft jazz humming, plates clinking gently, the hum of low conversation. A mother nursed a baby in the corner. An exhausted nurse dozed into a muffin. A student scribbled poetry into the margins of a textbook. This was the world she'd built. A refuge. A pause. A quiet rebellion against everything cold and transactional. Later that evening, during the soft opening, Rachel stood beside the piano holding a warm cup in one hand, a microphone in the other. She looked out at the room, full of life, full of stories. Years ago, she began, I paid for someone's coffee. That's it. $5. No big speech. No expectation. She paused. I didn't know who he was. I just saw someone being made small. And I couldn't look away. People leaned in. Some nodded. Some wiped their eyes. I thought I was helping a stranger who needed shelter. But looking back, I think, he helped me find the version of myself I didn't know I was allowed to become. She set the cup down. This cafe isn't about selling coffee. It's about presence. About showing up when no one else does. About giving without a price tag. She glanced at the chalkboard behind her. A man once told me, kindness doesn't need to be remembered. It only needs to be continued. She smiled. So that's what we're doing here. One cup at a time. Applause rose, gentle, sincere. A saxophone began to play in the corner. Someone laughed. Someone exhaled like they hadn't in months. And somewhere in the back, a first cup was poured. For someone who didn't know they needed it. Until they did. Rachel didn't become rich. She didn't write a book. She didn't marry Graham. But she built something better. Something enduring. Something true. And in a world that so often demanded proof before offering grace, she chose the opposite. She gave it freely. Without asking. And because of that, she became unforgettable. Not to headlines. Not to history books. But to people. To those who walked in from the cold with nothing but a story and found a place where they didn't have to earn their worth. And in the end, that was all she'd ever wanted. Not recognition. Not status. Just to be the person who stayed when everyone else turned away. The one who believed. Sometimes, all it takes is a cup of coffee to change someone's life. And sometimes, it changes yours too. Years passed. The paint on the cafe sign faded a little. The piano keys grew softer from use. The chalkboard menu changed with the seasons, but one line always remained the same. Your first cup is on us. Rachel had a few more lines near her eyes now. A few more silver strands in her hair. But her presence? It was steadier than ever. She still opened the shop each morning before sunrise. Still brewed the first pot herself. Still wiped down the counters with quiet care, because it mattered. Because people mattered. And on a gray October morning, much like the one where everything began, the bell above the cafe door chimed again. A young man stepped inside. Soaked. Hunched. His hands shook slightly as he clutched a tattered backpack. His eyes darted to the tables, to the warm laughter of strangers, to the board that listed no prices, only kindness. He hesitated. Rachel saw it. She always saw it. She walked slowly to the counter, meeting him where he stood. No questions. No assumptions. Just a simple offer. Would you like something warm? He blinked. Swallowed. I don't have anything on me right now. Rachel smiled. The first cup, she said softly, is always on us. And just like that, another circle began. Another story. Another soul not turned away. Another quiet moment where dignity was restored, not through grand gestures, but through presence. Through the simple, radical act of being seen. Outside, the city kept moving. Buses roared. People rushed. The world spun on. But inside that little cafe, time slowed. And kindness, once again, poured itself into a cup, and into someone who didn't know they needed it. Until they did.